Okay, we're going to get started. Can everybody hear me? If you can give a hand raise if you can hear me, that would be great. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And I will get started. So welcome to this I3 webinar on developing and using text-based simulations and gaming to teach middle school science. My name is Heidi Larson, and I'm part of the Technical Assistance Team for the Investing in Innovation Program, or I3, as well as the lead of the I3 Education Technology Community. Before we start, I want to review a couple of housekeeping items. You'll notice that you're all muted, but you can ask a question via the chat box, and I know that many of you have already introduced yourselves in there, so I appreciate that. Also, we will be recording the session to archive on our I3 community site. We heard from many people who said that they couldn't make it today and they hope to catch up with us later. So we will be archiving it and we'll send you out the URL. And before I go any further, I do want to say thank you to Rick Stanford, who is our technical host for today's webinar. And he's the one who's making this all possible, really. So, what is I3? The Investing in Innovation Program is funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Education and Improvement. Since 2010, the I3 program has funded 172 grantees across all 50 states. These grantees are meant to develop innovative practices that can serve as models for others to learn from, to take to scale those practices that have demonstrated effectiveness, and to conduct rigorous school-based research to enable grantees and educators to learn more about the effectiveness of various practices. It's really been a wonderful program. I've been really honored, actually, to work with these grantees. They're all working so hard to serve our children and our teachers, and they've really done some wonderfully creative things. And I'm really especially happy to present these three grantees today who have spent the time and effort to think, to envision, and to develop these technology products that you're going to be hearing about. So the objective today will be to learn how three I3 projects have developed education technology interventions to integrate excitement and fun into middle school science curricula. They're also going to reflect on the role technology can play in benefiting students struggling to understand the relevance of science concepts. They will discuss the education problem or challenge they're addressing, the product they and their team have developed or are developing, and the benefit they're trying to gain for students and teachers. They'll also discuss, during our panel questions, what they've learned from the process of developing a technology product for education. We'll have time for a few questions during and after each presentation, and then we'll have a broader discussion among all three presenters, and we'll be able to respond to your questions. And we've gotten some great questions already in the chat room. So our presenters today are Haruna Baugh, Jim Laffey, and Rob Piercy. Haruna is the Director of PsyPlay at the New York Hall of Science. The I3 grant is Playground Physics, a technology-enhanced model for bridging informal and formal science learning. Haruna joined the New York Hall of Science in November of 2013. He has extensive experience in investigating children's development of digital literacy skills and the impact of complex science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM, programs in formal as well as informal educational settings. And I know Haruna from studying the educational aspects of play in children. Jim Laffey is the Professor Emeritus of the School of Information Science and Learning Technologies at the University of Missouri. His grant is Mission Hydroside, Distance Learning Through Game-Based 3D Virtual Learning Environments. He's been at the University of Missouri for over 20 years, researching and developing interactive learning systems with grants from the U.S. Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and others. Prior to Missouri University, Jim worked for 6 years at Apple Computer developing learning systems and received several design awards for innovative interactive media. Robert Piercy, the Vice President of Education at the Challenger Center. His grant and his team's grant is Enriching Education Through Dynamic Simulation and Technology. He served as the Challenger Center's Vice President of Education for over 20 years, and he's using his experience after almost 20 years in education to contribute to an exciting time of growth and innovation for the Challenger Center organization. Reaching more than 250,000 students a year, Robert oversees the design, launch, and evaluation of the full suite of Challenger Center programs, of which this one is one of them. So at the end of their presentations, they'll be presenting links to their projects, and I'll also do that at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to switch you over to Haruna Voss, and he will be talking about playground physics. And let me just make you the presenter, Haruna.
Thank you, Heidi. As Heidi said before, my name is Aruna Ba, and I'm the New York Hall of Science. You all set?
All set.
Yep. Today I would like to share the result of a 5-year I3 research project called Playground Physics. The program was developed by the New York Hall of Science and evaluated by the American Institute for Research, AIR. The program is composed of an app, curriculum, and professional development activities for middle school teachers and students. Playground Physics aims to address the following educational needs by increasing student engagement with physics and increasing their knowledge of key physics concepts. Our approach to this work is based on what we call design, make, play, developed at the New York Hall of Science. It's a constructivist approach to science learning, and it has these core principles that you see on the slide. The first one is to leverage children's instinct to engage playfully with things they find compelling. The second one is to engage children as creators and makers, not just consumers of content, materials, and material objects. The third is to support interest-driven problem solving. Learners define and shape their task. The fourth encourages learners to pursue problems that have no right answer. And the last principle is to present activities to them with a low barrier to entry and a high ceiling of rich potential complexity and a wide berth for the creative expression of ideas. So the Playground Physics, this 5-year project, during this 5-year project, the project is just ending now. This is the last month of the project. We have developed an iPad app called Playground Physics, which I will describe shortly. And then there's a curriculum, and there are 3 types of activities that the curriculum addresses. One is about motion, force, and energy, but all organized around physical play, children's physical play on the playground. And the 6-week curriculum uses videos students take to teach motion, force, and energy. The curriculum is split into 3 units, one for each content area that the app covers. Each of the units centers around a game that kids play on the playground, and the students explore the concept in relationship to those activities. For example, playing catch for motion, jumping rope for force, and swinging for energy. Teachers can choose to either follow a progression of lessons or lead their student in an open-ended science investigation. The curriculum is aligned with Common Core standards, New York State science standards, and the next generation science standards. The teachers for the study that we conducted during the project period, they receive professional development introducing them to the app and curriculum. So now let me show you a little bit how the app works. So start by taking a video of yourself or your friend or your dog or whatever you find interesting. We have included some overlays for running, climbing, throwing, swinging, sliding, but you can really record almost anything. Next, you create the path of the person or object by tapping its position on the screen at each time point. Then, input some calibration information, and finally, you can play back your video and discover physics in your movement. For example, if you replay your video in the energy lens, you will see your potential and kinetic energy and related quantities like your height, speed, etc. if you look at your play data in the motion lens, you can see the distance traveled, your speed, and direction. So in terms of the study that we conducted two types of study. One was, most of them were formative, design-based research that we did while we were developing the app and the curriculum and the PD. And the rest of the work, meaning which is like the last 2 years of the initiative, we conducted a quasi-experimental design study led by AIR. We worked with middle school teachers in New York City for the experimental design study, which I'm going to be focusing on the result of that today. I'm not going to talk about the formative. We worked with 45 teachers for the RCT, 25 intervention, and 21 in the control. And there were at least 1,200 students who were involved, 759 in the intervention, and then 438 in the control group. So I'm going to share a few of the results, but the report will be available at the end of the month, this month, on our website and on the AIR website if you want to know more about the study. But let me just share a few highlights. So most treatment teachers believe that playground physics was equally or more engaging than their regular physics curriculum. Another impact on students. So one of the things that we found was that the student of teachers implementing playground physics, the treatment teachers, have significantly greater knowledge and understanding of physics concepts than students of teachers implementing their regular physics curriculum, control teachers. However, despite the teachers' perception of kids being engaged and student self-report of being engaged while using the app, the study did not find any differences between the treatment and control group students in terms of their self-reported level of engagement. And then I just wanted to touch on a few things that I think that we need to do more research around. One is to really understand what are the different approaches to implementing playground physics efficiently in different school settings. You know, the teachers typically use the playground physics in our study, in our project, to supplement their regular curriculum. So it is important that the impact of the playground physics curriculum on knowledge was observed, even though treatment teachers did not use it exclusively. So I think we need to look into this more and to see, you know, why that was the case. This might suggest that the effect of playground physics is robust to variation in implementation, but we're not very sure about that. Another issue that I think we should look into it more is the issue of the level of engagement because of the play and how we assume that it will deeply engage the student and lead to these increased knowledge, which happen regardless of not finding any level of high engagement or significant differences in engagement. We are suspecting that maybe the retrospective survey that we use may not have been sensitive enough to measure the differences in effect experienced several days prior to the survey administration. So that's just one of the reasons that we think might be one of the reasons. The other reason might be the duration of the curriculum unit may not have been great enough to have influenced these attitudes and engagement. Also, given the high proportion of students who rated themselves highly on this construct, as on our post surveys, it is possible that the measure were not sensitive to small but important group differences. So if you want to know more about playground physics or download it from it's available on the App Store for free, but if you want to know more about the tool, you can, in the curriculum, you can get access to it for free on a website, on the NISI website. It's called noticing.nisi.org. And also I mentioned that the evaluation report will be available to you by the end of this month on our website or on the AIR website. Thank you. Any questions? question?
Sharina. This is Heidi. I have put a link to the Playground Physics and the nicei.org link on the chat room, so you can go there along with a couple of other links about Playground Physics. So are there any questions for Haruna? In which case, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in. For now, we'll go to Mission Hydrosci with Jim Laffey. Thank you, Haruna.
Thank you. Thanks, Heidi and Haruna. And thank you guys for your interest in Mission Hydrosci and gaming and education. So Mission Hydrosci is a game-based 3D virtual learning environment for middle school science education. Students learn about water systems, surface, ground, and atmospheric water, and also build competencies with scientific argumentation. A key emphasis of our project is to develop a learning system appropriate for distance learning. This means, among other things, that a teacher is not likely to be present during gameplay. Mission Hydrosci should also be appropriate for a classroom, and especially a blended learning setting. Gameplay is expected to take from 5 to 8 class periods, and for most teachers will probably be a substitute or supplement for however they handle water systems curriculum at this point. Simply stated, school has a fun deficit. We need additional ways to engage students in science curriculum, and we need to have students be active learners if we have any hope of their retaining and being able to put knowledge into practice. Video games are engaging, and for many kids, a key activity when they are outside of school. Learning games, or learning through games, may also be especially effective at engaging and reaching kids who are not typically high performers in class. As I mentioned, we are especially interested in supporting distance learning, which is growing and is likely to be especially important for kids in smaller and rural communities. Teaching to reach the new standards is challenging, and we believe gameplay can be a good way to integrate knowledge and practices such as scientific argumentation. Gameplay also emphasizes learning by doing and allows us to take advantage of advances in technology. The gameplay starts with a mission to a faraway planet and the explosion of your spaceship. You and your non-player character cohorts, those are automated characters, not other kids, as the game is a single-player game. You jettison onto the planet, and then you have to help your cohorts build bases and survive. If you've seen the movie Martian, where the main character is constantly solving problems, Mission Hydrosci has a similar approach to gameplay. In this scene, our player is floating a supply crate back to the base camp while learning about watersheds and water flow. Sasha Brab and his colleagues developed a way of thinking about how to use games for learning, and they called it transformational play. We find that a compelling theory or approach to game development. Kids become protagonists in a story and must solve problems to be the hero. In order to solve a problem, they must learn new things. Thus, in order to transform the world that they're in, they must also transform themselves by building new knowledge. Oops, that's the wrong thing. As part of the development of Mission Hydrosci, we're also building a learning analytics system for monitoring and improving gameplay, and a teacher support system to help teachers prepare for and support kids during gameplay. In this scene, our player is still on the spacecraft prior to explosion and is being introduced to Arth, who is an intelligent agent who supports the player throughout the game with both science knowledge and gameplay knowledge. Here we are meeting a fellow cadet who is setting up her base camp and needs the player's help. Here we're entering the ruins from an ancient civilization. Our player will need to restore many of the water systems that were developed but are now in disrepair. Here's a 2D simulation integrated into the 3D game to teach about porosity of earth materials. The player needs to learn about porosity to open up a well system left by the alien inhabitants. In each unit of the instruction, the player interacts with a 3D world to solve problems, as I've given you a couple of examples of kind of how the kids will experience the game. And the players need to build their water systems through those experiences. But each unit also requires the player to engage in an argument in order to continue the mission. Here's our argumentation engine that enables the player to make claims, support claims with evidence, and provide reasons for how the evidence supports the claim. The student drags a claim into the center and then adds evidence and reasoning to make an argument. In closing out my portion of the webinar, let me tell you a little about the status of Mission Hydrocide. It's a work in progress. We've developed about 2/3 of the game and have done testing in our lab at the university and also in classrooms in Columbia, Missouri. In the fall, we will be having a completed, or we hope to have a completed system and do more formative evaluation in a variety of classroom and distance learning settings. We are open to having volunteers for this evaluation. We also plan field tests for understanding the impact of Mission Hydrocide on student learning for the spring and fall of 2018. If you have any interest in finding out more about Mission Hydrocide or possibly volunteering to participate in our formative or field testing, please contact me via email. So thanks for joining our call. And now I'm going to be passing the ball. Let me put the right slides to Rob Piercy.
Thanks, Jim, and Haruna and Heidi. And hello, everybody. It's nice to be talking with you today. My name is Rob Piercy. I'm the VP of Education at Challenger Center. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our I3 project, which was awarded back in 2014. We have just finished our pilot phase, and our project really kind of focused on the statement that you see on the screen here. You know, today's students are tomorrow's innovators. We know that, but do they know that? Are they prepared? You know, Challenger Center has got a deep 30-year history of working with students, trying to get them excited about STEM concepts and STEM careers. We're looking to kind of spark that passion with them when they're young learners, to try and get them along the path for success for their futures, trying to make them more curious about what's out there. And our project with the Department of Education and the I3 program has been a great resource for us. As many know, too many kids lose interest in science, technology, engineering, and math at an early age. Challenger Center focuses very heavily on kind of the 3 through 8 or 3 through 9 grades. Obviously, all the research shows that if you're able to get kids excited at an early age, it's going to lead to higher levels of engagement and interest when they get a little bit older. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to kind of wait until the students are into their high school years or certainly into higher ed. Losing those kids at those early grades really limits their opportunities. And obviously, in a very competitive kind of global economy, we need to prepare our kids to be very competitive in that world, teaching them the skills that they need to succeed later in life. Challenger Center, as Heidi mentioned before, reaches about 250,000 students a year, mostly through our 43 learning centers around the world. We take STEM concepts and put them in a context of exciting real-world challenges, giving them a sense of realism, obviously focusing on the academic content and standards as well. But like Jim said, having that kind of fun piece be a component of our programs is very important to us. We expose kids to a wide range of STEM careers, develop hands-on activities to really allow kids to apply those concepts, and skill building is center to what we do. Teamwork, communication, and problem solving are really necessary components for students to succeed at a Challenger Learning Center. Recently, most of our missions at Challenger Learning Centers, and you see the little logos below, the kids might take a virtual trip to Mars or a trip to rendezvous with a comet. Our I3 project, which we were very excited to work on this year finally with kids during our implementation, was titled Aquatic Investigators. And it was our first mission written more for a classroom environment. As I mentioned, we were awarded our I3 Research and Development Grant early in 2014. We designed our EngiLearn platform and built our first ever mission that we titled Aquatic Investigators. Our goal long term is to have our EngiLearn platform host a wide array of missions that target different students in different grades. We based our pilot on 5th grade curriculum in the state of Virginia. We partnered with 4 great school districts in Virginia and piloted the program with approximately 2,600 students, about half of them in treatment classes and half of them in control classes. We made sure that all the ocean science content was aligned to their 5th grade standards of learning to make sure that it was something that their teachers and their kids knew was a necessary component of the 5th grade. And we had a great mission development team. Our Challenger Center staff, headquartered here in Washington, D.C., partners at NOAA, NASA, and Engineering, or Oceaneering rather. The Richmond Math Science Innovation Center was also a great partner. They're one of our Challenger Learning Centers. They had a lot of great relationships with the 4 Virginia districts that we worked with. And finally, lead teachers from each of the partnering districts. We wanted to make sure that the content and the program we were creating was going to meet their needs and through them meet their students' needs. A few project highlights. We built in embedded assessment into our software to capture student progress in real time. Teachers implemented our simulated mission through a tablet, and we wanted to make sure that we had the functionality where they were seeing student progress in real time. So by embedding assessment into our program and into our software, teachers were able to see right away which kids were struggling, which kids were excelling. It really led to a more successful implementation. As I mentioned, our ocean science concepts were fully aligned to Virginia Standards of Learning. We wanted to make sure that was a key component of what we did. Because it was a randomized study, we created a blended professional development model. We knew that we were going to be getting teachers with very different needs and very different strengths and weaknesses. Some might have had a lot of experience using technology in the classroom. Some had very, very little. Some might have struggled in the past teaching science in the 5th grade. Some might be teaching outside of their certification areas. We created a blended PD model to establish that foundational understanding for teachers to implement the pilot in a strong fashion. The instructional design of the program, it was a blended model, was designed to appeal to students with different learning styles. We knew that kids were going to be entering the pilot with different levels of readiness as well. So we tried to use a lot of different instructional methods to keep the kids moving, to keep the kids doing, to keep the kids engaged. And finally, we created classroom kits that were designed to provide all the necessary supplies for teachers. We wanted this to be as easy to implement as possible, knowing how precious teachers' prep time is and how tough it is sometimes to bring outside programs into the classroom. Our project and evaluation goals, working with our external evaluator, the EngiLearn project and the Aquatic Investigators mission, had academic achievement in science as one of its key primary outcomes. We wanted to assess how students learned and applied these key ocean science concepts compared to the control group. We were also very excited that we were able to work 21st century skill assessment into the impact assessment as well. Academic engagement, self-efficacy, academic intentions, as well as digital literacy. It's pretty rare to see a study sometimes include both academic and skill outcomes. Knowing that the engaging manner that we created the program model, we wanted to see where we were exactly impacting student achievement. We wanted to get feedback both on the academic side as well as on the skill side, which we know is so important to raising student achievement. Everybody say hello to Eric the Monk Seal. When we were creating our program, we talked to NOAA, and NOAA really spoke a lot about the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and how the Hawaiian monk seal that was once flourishing in the region is in a lot of trouble. And the Hawaiian monk seal is in trouble for everything from pH levels to water temperatures to ocean debris to habitat loss. Challenger Center missions have storylines that put the kids in the commander seat. We want them to take ownership over their learning, want them to play an important role as part of a team. So for the Aquatic Investigators mission, we told them that our ocean's in trouble. You know, researchers in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands are reporting these incredible changes in the region. A group of scientists, in this case it was our students, had been tasked with a vital mission. Take a voyage to an underwater research facility and lead an important study that will investigate the cause and commit to raising awareness. This really got the kids engaged, got the kids invested. Putting science in a real-world context like that, we've seen for 30 years at Challenger Center, really impacts student achievement and gets them more invested in the activities. It was about an 8-hour experience altogether, days 1 and 2, and this was implemented over a full school week, so it was Monday through Friday. Days 1 and 2 were kind of our pre-mission content. This is where all the students learned all about the ocean science fundamentals that they were going to need to apply later on in the week. Because our missions are created where students work on different teams, our software generates individual and unique content based on the student teams that they happen to be on. So a student on a hydro team would see very different content than a student on a bio team, for example. So knowing that the mission was going to be a little bit individualized like that, we had to create that understanding in days 1 and 2 around those key concepts. Day 3 was our Aquatic Investigators Ocean mission. It was about 2 hours long, and it was a combination of, this is really where the software took over and started generating a lot more of the instructional guidance. Days 1 and 2, the teacher taught in a bit more of a traditional way, but using some different instructional models. Day 3 is where the EngineLearn platform and our mission software took over and really started teaching the experience to kids. Teachers turned more into facilitators at this point. Days 4 and 5 were our extension activities. Day 4, kids went through an engineer design challenge where we actually asked them to think about a redesign option for an underwater research facility. Again, very real world, connecting back to the storyline that we use to engage the kids. And on day 5, knowing how important writing is, we designed a writing activity where kids use our software to create a digital newsletter where they reflected on the science, reflected on their experience in their teams, and talked about different ways they can raise awareness both in their schools and in their communities. A little bit of information on our blended professional development model. Online modules focused first on ocean science because we knew that we were going to be having teachers come in with different levels of mastery and understanding about some of those key ocean science fundamentals, not only on the science but also how to use it and how to engage kids at high levels around it. We also developed an online module to expose teachers to the EngineLearn platform itself and its functionality. We knew that it was going to be kind of a foreign technology in a classroom, and knowing that it was going to be teachers in different levels of comfort around using technology with kids, we had to expose them to our software and the program model. The fact that they were online modules allowed teachers to go through them more than once if they wanted to. We were able to get some great videos through NOAA and some of our partners, used a lot of screenshots to expose them to our platform and its functionality. Finally, we had 2 days of great professional development in person where we took them through the entire full 8-hour experience and prepared them to run it successfully in their classrooms. This is just a screenshot of our user interface. Our software is designed to have everything a student needs to succeed in our mission right there in front of them. In the bottom left-hand corner, that's one of our task cards. That's where our kids get all the directions on what they're supposed to be doing and how much time they have for developing and creating individual projects and working on individual tasks. Down the right-hand side is where we have our digital tools. We really want to try and bring the science to life by allowing kids to use these tools in an interactive manner. Sometimes we would show videos, sometimes there would be animations, sometimes the kids would be exchanging information in between teams. There was a high level of engagement during the actual mission. It really led to kids having fun, and we hope to kids really learning these ocean science fundamentals at very, very high levels. The future for ENGILearn and Aquatic Investigators, our I3 grant isn't over until the end of 2017, so our work continues now with our evaluator to complete our impact in our implementation studies. Feedback from our partner districts was great, from people at the district level to teachers to kids. Really got some super feedback. We are creating a roadmap, already looking to strengthen the Aquatic Investigators mission and investigate ways to validate and scale the program in the future. We're looking at the STEM market for a program like this. What else is out there that is similar? What kind of need could this fit to really try and get these students engaged and inspired? We're looking at different areas of science like energy and space science as possible topics for new missions in the future. As I stated, the ENGILearn platform's very dynamic. We think in the future we might be able to have 6 or 8 or 10 of these missions, probably shorter in length, probably not the same blended model that we did for our pilot. That was pretty specific to the research, but more modular, more flexible, a little bit shorter in duration, designed to really engage the students at high levels. We would hope that teachers would be interested in using this throughout the school year, maybe to introduce different science blocks. And finally, our overall goal at Challenger Center, reach more students, and like I mentioned, really ignite their interest in STEM concepts in careers. For those of you guys that are interested in learning more about either the Aquatic Investigators program or Challenger Center, please take a look at our website, www.challenger.org. And thank you very much for this time. It was great talking with everybody. And Heidi, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yes, please. Thank you for Haruna, Jim, and Rob. And we're just going to go through a few panel questions now. If you do have any questions for any of the presenters, please do enter them in the chat room. But for now, I'm interested in how the students have reacted to all of this. And can you tell us any student responses, any stories regarding the students and how they, especially like in the Challenger Center, when something about obtaining out trash from the ocean. Can you talk a little bit about how the students have responded to these platforms, and maybe starting with Rob?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the most exciting labs that we put into our model was an ocean debris lab. We basically bought a lot of new stuff, like ping pong balls, or golf balls rather, buttons, bags, water bottles, and we really trashed them up. And the idea was we wanted to try and teach the kids that regardless of where you live in the world, debris quite unfortunately finds itself to our oceans. And there is a gigantic global conveyor belt moving these little islands of trash around the world. And a lot of it unfortunately ends up in the stomachs or, in different areas of different mammals or different animals. So we designed an activity where we gave the kids a bag of what we told them was trash from around the world. They had to do a little bit of research to identify the origin of that trash, and it was either Southeast Asia or Australia or Africa or the United States. And it all had different kind of little logos on it to give them hints. But these kids opened the bag, and they were, 5th graders, so they're 10-year-old boys and girls. They opened the bag, and they were yelling like, "Oh, it smells like seaweed," and they were passing it around, and we had them convinced. We had them convinced that it was trash from around the world, and it was impacting Eric the monk seal. Every day we have kids that go on voyages to Mars in our Challenger Learning Centers or a trip to the moon, and sometimes you can't convince these kids that they actually didn't go to space. So we use our storylines and our activities to be real, relevant, hands-on scenarios that get the kids invested in their learning. And that ocean debris activity that Heidi mentioned was one of those examples. It really kind of brought the learning to life for them, knowing that it wasn't something they were, reading out of a textbook or hearing from a teacher. It was something that was real and tangible. It was in their hands, and it really was impacting things in our ocean.
Great, thanks. And then Haruna, you also are doing kind of a blended learning. The kids are on the playground and using digital technology. Can you talk a little bit about how they reacted to the iPad app? Just stories. I know you told us about the research.
Yes, as I was saying earlier, this is like I'm focusing on the RCT that AIR did. And since it was an experimental design study, it's very hard to kind of get a sense of how the kids reacted to the program. But I think based on the survey that they administered to the teachers and the students, we get a sense that the kids were very engaged, especially when they were in the playground or playing with the app and recording their videos. They were very engaged. And once they returned into the classroom, I think, meaning you were not there, I don't have data to substantiate this, but I think it went back to the traditional way of learning, I think. That's what I think happened. I think that's why we didn't see any changes in the engagement, or maybe kids were actually pretty much engaged from the beginning, and then that it didn't show in their instruments. But I think also the teachers, on the survey teachers, the teachers felt that the kids were more engaged when they were doing playground physics, the playground physics curriculum than in their regular classroom. So that's something also that I mentioned. But I think overall the kids were very engaged, but we just didn't have a way of capturing their engagement with the tool.
I did put a link to a video that was on YouTube, Haruna, that I found in it, and you can see that the kids are having fun.
Exactly.
Using the app.
That was at a middle school, not far from actually NISI, near Hall of Science. But that wasn't part of the study, but that was just something that we did with the kids at the school. It was fun. They were playing basketball, using the app, measuring, learning, very engaged.
Yeah, and how about you, Jim? Can you talk, have a couple stories about the student interaction, at least the pilots that you've done so far?
Yeah, so just a quick story. In May, as I mentioned, we have about 2/3 of the game completed. In May, we talked one of our local teachers in the Columbia Public School District into implementing the game in her class, one of her classrooms, so that we could do some testing and see kind of how it works in the wild. Which is a pretty substantial commitment, since it was about 4 days of gameplay for the kids. So we did that and really learned a lot from getting that in the classroom. But the next week she came back to us and said, I need you guys to come back and do it for my other 3 classes, because they are jealous of the first class. So although that doesn't tell us everything we need to know about our game, it does tell us that the kids were engaged and were excited by the ability to play the game in school.
Great, and then can you talk, maybe Jimmy, you can go first, what lessons have you learned and what advice would you give for anybody wanting to design, develop, and launch technology initiatives for education?
Yeah, I think just thinking over having done technology initiatives for education over 20, 25 years, the first thing is to recognize that there are all levels of technology initiatives in terms of the complexity of what the technology that you have to master is. And to take on a substantial kind of application like the one Haruna or Rob or myself have been talking about really requires a team of people with a variety of skills and competencies. Sometimes these projects are taken on by somebody with the vision who hires some company or contracts with some company to deliver the work. And sometimes these projects are built by an in-house team, or sometimes there's kind of a hybrid of these situations. I think to the extent that you view the work that you're doing as a research project, I would always recommend towards trying to build in-house competency for that, because you're going to have to go back and make changes and react to the kind of initial responses you get and be able to have the flexibility to do that. So finding or building an in-house team, or finding a set of collaborators who have a similar vision to yourself is one of the key things that I'd recommend.
Great. And Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with all that, Jim. One of the things I'd probably add too, a lot of technology now that's being looked at as possibilities for the classroom, whether it's AR or VR or different things like that. A lot of times technology pushes on the educational system and talking about how, technology is the next big thing, or VR is the next big thing. I know one of the things that I definitely recommend is, looking at opportunities to develop programs for kids and for teachers really start with the needs of the kids and the teachers, as we all have, and as I3 obviously works so closely with their awardees to promote. You know, no two classes are really the same, and kids are learning very differently than they ever have before, and teachers are teaching differently than they ever have before. But having a real good understanding of what those classroom environments are like, the strengths and limitations of some of our teachers sometimes, and the learning styles of our students, you know, have that really drive some of the design and development stages of projects. Because I know sometimes we, you know, we know things are cool and we know things are engaging, but when you get it in the hands of kids or teachers, sometimes it's a little bit different because it's always being run by another person, not necessarily the people who design it. So always, you know, and we do this at Challenger Center, always kind of look at that learner first, you know, their needs. What are you trying to really, what are you trying to achieve? What outcomes are you trying to hit? And make sure you're designing programs that meet the needs of our classrooms and our teachers and our kids.
Great. Haruna, do you have any advice for people?
I would just add to what everybody has said. I think I agree with all of that. In our case, I think our team spent a lot of time thinking about how to make it easy for teachers to implement these complex initiatives. Since it involved technology, it involved taking kids outside, bringing them back into the classroom, that kind of management. It's really, we put a lot of thought into that, I think, the team here at the New York Hall of Science. And in our curriculum, we have a whole section that talks about how do you, organize your kids, what do you think, how do you think about the whole process. So that's one piece that I think is critical. The other piece, I think, is more from a research perspective. There's always this tension between, like, trying to do a kind of a scientific research study and then having to deal with so many unknown variables in your environment, like in the intervention, that is not, if you structure too much, you won't do what you want it to do, and then the research also will be impacted. So thinking through those two, like how do you align the research and the intervention in a way that makes sense? That's another piece that I think will be good for the field, like everybody to think about, come up with some solution to that.
Thanks. And you have, actually, I just wanted to mention in the chat room, Rob talked about how you need to have, to know what the teachers need, what the issues are in the classroom. So I did put out a request if you have any ideas for new missions for any of these. Go ahead and type them into the chat room too, and they'd be happy to hear your advice. So I'm going to go to one of the questions that came up in the chat early on, and one of the questions that I'm hoping to learn about ways to make STEM more appealing to a more diverse student population and help them be successful in those fields. And I'm wondering, did you see, was this beneficial for a diverse student population? Did you see students learn about students who normally struggle with science, who are suddenly engaged? I'm not sure how much detail you got into the individual students. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah. In our study, actually, we were able, in the RCP, the experimental design study that AIR did, we reached around, I believe, 60% of our students were underserved. They have free and reduced lunch. That was the percentage that we got. And I think the purpose of using play as a way to engage kids into these complex, to learn about these complex concepts was actually to broaden, underserved kids' access to these types of learning. So the primary reason behind our approach was to kind of figure out ways to invite them into learning about physics. So I think in that sense, it will have a positive impact on the learning in general of all the students most of the students participated in the study, then I think that was a good outcome for us.
Great, thanks. Jim or Rob, do you have any response?
Yeah, hey, this is Rob. I'd definitely piggyback on that. The way that we change instructional models so often during the 8-hour kind of blended model, we were really trying to give kids a chance. Sometimes learning about ocean science isn't the funnest thing in the world. But when we're building some of these real-world scenarios into our storylines, you know, we always see in our programs that if a student's invested in the activity, if a student's invested in the concept, they're naturally going to take it more seriously and they're going to work a bit harder. We find that the scenarios and the what would you do type learning opportunities is great. So we try and make the content as relevant and as real world as possible. Sometimes they're putting it into a framework or a storyline that's a bit conceptual, but always kind of blending that experiential mix with some of the more traditional instruction. So that blending of modalities is something that we do a lot in our programs. We did a lot in Aquatic Investigators and really found that, you know, by the time a kid thought he or she was getting bored, you know, after 10 or 15 minutes of a mini lesson on pH levels, the mini lesson was over and they were moving around the room doing a hands-on activity. So keeping the kids moving, keeping the kids engaged, looking to really get them all invested, knowing that it won't all happen at once, but creating opportunities for, you know, some student choice and some teacher flexibility, really kind of all factored into our design of Aquatic Investigators and will into future missions that we're going to put on the EngineLearn platform.
Yeah, I would add that in our classroom setting, one of the things that we noticed that we hadn't really planned for as much was there was a great deal of social activity, kids helping each other. And one of the things that the teacher commented upon was that it wasn't the typical kids who help each other in the science class. You know, it wasn't the kids who always had the right answer that were the ones being the helpful ones. They were the ones sometimes being the ones needing help. And so in some ways, it might have flipped the classroom a little bit, and that the kids who had more gaming experience now were the ones that could be the leaders and the strong ones in the class. So I think just that, you know, the different modality of learning through a game brings out some differences in kids that don't typically show up in our classrooms.
I know we have Chris Dede on the line from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I've heard him say the same thing, that in his EcoLearn and different science modules online, and both online and virtual and augmented reality, he does talk about how the kids that are generally struggling from just the textbooks, when they get out into the real world or into the virtual simulations, they are very, very engaged, and surprises some of the teachers too. So it's wonderful to have the kids that are maybe are strong in gaming, and to be able to have a kind of a heads up or a leg up on this kind of learning and actually be able to get engaged. I'm going to go to just one more from the panel and then one more from the questions from earlier. What else can you say about how teachers would implement these products into their classroom? Rob, you talked about the professional development that was needed. Is it something that you would like to see less need for professional development, or did it work out pretty well?
I think it worked out pretty well based on our current model. You know, teachers' time is so precious, and it's difficult to get them out of the classroom. It's difficult to, you know, their moms and their dads and their deans and their security and their cafeteria people and their, you know, teachers on top of everything. So we knew that we had to build as flexible a model as possible. I think in the future, you know, when maybe our missions aren't part of, you know, randomized studies, and maybe teachers are opting in to doing something like this in their classroom, it might be a little bit different. But I've always been a big believer in having flexible, modular type training and PD options for teachers, something that they can do on their own time, that they can take at their own pace. Something that they can do more than once sometimes, knowing that their needs are going to be a little bit different. Feedback overall from the teachers that we worked with across the 4 districts was pretty positive. You know, they liked the fact that there were online supports as an initial step to kind of get their feet wet with the program model and the technology. The online modules were not designed to get the teachers to a level of mastery. You know, we knew that it was going to be a process, and we had some teachers do the pilot more than once with multiple classes based on their schedules. And they were even sharing back with us, it was a lot easier for them to do it a second go around than the first. So I think in the future, we'll take all those things that we observed during our pilot phase obviously look at our impact and implementation studies very closely and look to try and build in training and support mechanisms that are as flexible and modular and interactive as possible. In the future, there's even a possibility for us, if we want to create a professional learning community, and have teachers helping teachers implement programs on the EngineLearn platform. So the initial pilot was really successful, and I think our PD model met the needs of the initial trial. Moving forward, it's one of the things that we're definitely building into our kind of validation plans and looking at opportunities to scale.
Great. Haruna, did you need a lot of professional development for your teachers, or was it pretty easy for them to pick up?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the findings actually, but we need to look more into it. I was referencing it when I was presenting, is that we felt like different teachers kind of implemented in different ways, but then we got impact on the content knowledge piece, which was interesting because it wasn't like totally rigid. The intervention wasn't that rigid, and or at least it was robust, it seems, but we need to check into that more. And also they use the program to enhance the existing physics instruction, so they really did not use it as a full curriculum. So they kind of integrated into what they were doing, which I think was great. And then I think one of the issues that I think if you were gonna, if you were gonna improve how we ask teachers to implement this in a way that makes sense to us, would be to have them spend more time allowing kids to explore their play performances before they get into the content, to kind of make clear the connection between the play activities and then the learning piece in a more like intentional way. So I felt like that we didn't capture that enough. So that's just my own research interest. And
something for the next time.
Yeah, I think also the idea of having learning communities around this work at a school level makes total sense to me. That we kind of have working around that together.
So I'm just going to go, Jim, I'm going to cut you off here. I'm just going to go for one quick question. Each of the three of you, do you have any other suggestions or any ideas of other games that and simulations that teachers can use in their classrooms? Or any ones that you looked at before as you were developing your own?
Well, I would say the work that Chris Eady has done up at Harvard and the offshoots of that, the EcoMove, I think are really excellent starting places for teachers that want to try games.
Hey, Haruna and Rob, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, we looked at like tools. Ours is not a game; it's more of a noticing tool. So we looked at on Vernier. They sell instruments. So they have a lot of digital tools. There are a lot of apps out there that kind of capture movement and play, but it's not like it's not for learning. It's really just a documentation tool. So we looked at a lot of those when we shifted from using computers and sensors on the playground to like more of an iPad app. So that kind of changed our focus. But we looked at digital tools, digital noticing tools.
Okay, great. And one more?
Same with us, because it was a blended model. We looked at certain people out there like EIE, for some of the engineering kind of hands-on activities, because our software is so unique and because we've been doing it for so long with our Challenger Learning Center. It's not really a game per se. We looked a bit more out there at who was doing more experiential project-based things with students in the STEM space, and maybe whether or not models like that or resources like that, had a good fit in our pilot.
Well, excellent. So we are out of time. So I wanted to thank all of our attendees and our presenters, and to Rick as well for doing our technology. And we really appreciate it. And look for an email if you did register. Look for an email, and we'll send you a link to the recording. And I hope that you'll have a wonderful rest of your day and wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, everybody.